Hey guys, what happens when you take Pokemon and bring it to a TTRPG setting? Well, the following story is one such way. Hail, and well met. I've been a long-time reader of this subreddit, and I figured it was high time I should post one of my own horror stories. This is all about how one line from a player sparked a disagreement that ended with said player throwing a temper tantrum and the game being ultimately disbanded. The players and their characters are as follows. Myself playing Addison, who is a channeler/fashionista. There's Roy, who is a medic/mechanic. We have the GM. We have Isaac, who was playing a ninja. And then we have Sadie, who is a breeder, who is also the problem of this story. It all started with a Pokemon Tabletop United game on Roll20. I was fairly new to the system, and this was only the second game I had played with it. It was a sci-fi game where the players were students of a space exploration academy, except, in the Pokemon world. The group had decided to pick up a new player to add more flavor to the group, and that new player was me. I rolled up Addison, who was a total cinnamon roll who was descended from a long line of Aura Guardians, but had never presented any Aura-related powers of her own. As a result, she viewed herself as a disappointment to her family, and is anxious about her seeming lack of powers, as well as just anxious in general. For those of you who don't know, in the Pokemon universe, Aura is basically a force that flows through all living things. Certain Pokemon, and more uncommonly people, have the ability to read and manipulate Aura. The first session started with Addison's own crew having crash-landed on the planet where the main party was already exploring. The first session went really well, and Addison blended in really well with the rest of the party. One party member had taken a particular interest in Addison, and that was Sadie. I would also like to clarify at this point that while Sadie was playing a girl character, Sadie themselves was actually a dude, so if there's any confusion over me referring to them as a he or a she, I apologize. So Sadie and Addison became very fast friends, and everything seemed to be going well. Addison had even developed a budding friendship with Roy, and while she and Isaac hadn't interacted much, there wasn't any bad blood. I found out between sessions that Isaac and Sadie were kind of at odds with each other in terms of personality, and the two of them had somewhat of a rivalry going on, which, to the player's credit, had stayed in character. Everything was going well at this point, and I cannot describe how out of left field this came. Session 2 rolled around the next week, and our characters were hanging out in their home base, waiting for one of our two AI NPCs to return from an expedition with our next plot thread. Sadie was sulking over our previous mission, as both she and her Pokemon had gotten pretty injured in a fight against the resident evil team. We, as players in this particular game, were not only role-playing our trainers, but also their Pokemon. So Roy's Happiny waddled over to Sadie to try and cheer her up. And that's when Sadie said it.
Sadie swats Happiny away.
And all hell broke loose. Stuff started happening immediately. Roy grabbed his Happiny, Isaac lunged across the table and punched Sadie, Addison was trying to calm down the now crying Pokemon, and soon Isaac and Sadie were locked in an all-out brawl, punching and kicking, while the GM had the AI NPC, who was still at the home base with us, was trying to pull them off of each other. The game had devolved into sheer chaos. Eventually, the NPC managed to get both Isaac and Sadie tied down and started lecturing them about how they shouldn't be fighting when they're a team, and Sadie shouldn't have hit Roy's Happiny, etc., etc. It's at this point that Sadie spoke out of character.
What are you guys talking about? I didn't hit Happiny.
He then went on to explain that he had used the wrong word. While he had used the word swat to describe Sadie's actions, the word he meant was shoe. We, as a group, were like, "Oh, okay, we can retcon this, no problem then." However, While Sadie wanted to go back and retroactively say that Sadie did not in fact hit Happini, he wanted his character to be completely innocent, but he wanted everyone else to think that he did indeed hit what was effectively this universe equivalent to a baby animal. Now don't get me wrong, I have absolutely no problem with inter-party conflict in RPGs, when it's discussed with the involved players before it happens. So of course, I spoke up. Dude, you can't do that. This makes no sense for any of our characters, and they were all sitting like 5 feet away from Sadie. They would have seen if she had actually hit Happini. Roy backs me up as this was his Pokemon. Yeah, Sadie, I roleplayed that Happini started crying specifically because I thought you had hit her. If Sadie hadn't hit her, she wouldn't have started crying. Isaac piped in as well.
Yeah, and I only punched Sadie because Happini started crying.
We tried his best to illustrate to Sadie the facts of the matter. If Sadie didn't hit Happini, Happini wouldn't have started crying. If Happini didn't start crying, then no one would have been mad at Sadie. If no one was mad at Sadie, Isaac wouldn't have punched her. But Sadie was having none of it. For some reason, despite the fact that as far as Roy and I could tell, he wouldn't benefit in any way from having everyone think his character was a monster. He wanted it both ways. We ended up arguing about this point in game with him for an hour of game time. I ended up giving him an ultimatum. Look, Sadie, we can go about this one of two ways. Either A, Sadie hit Happini, everyone knows she did, and the whole chaotic fight stands. Or B, Sadie didn't hit Happini, and nobody thinks she did. And we keep playing as if it didn't happen.
Well, I don't want either of those options.
It eventually got to the point where Roy, Isaac, and I were getting so uncomfortable with how determined Sadie was to turn this into a witch hunt on his character, we ended up agreeing as the rest of the party to retcon the SWAT, and we spend the rest of the session chatting amongst ourselves in character. Sadie, however, was not happy. After the session, Sadie proceeded to post several paragraphs about how disrespectful we were when he didn't feel like the issue was settled. He also states that, from now on, he would be playing Sadie in a different manner, if anyone even cared about her enough. The week following, Session 3 rolled around. After a short expedition where Roy and I found some really cool alien Eevee, we once again head back to home base. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that Addison was a fashionista. One of the ways I expressed this in character was that in order to comfort herself, and just for fun, she likes to make little accessories for her friends and Pokemon. As a player, I wanted to try and use this to my advantage to extend an olive branch to Sadie in the form of matching friendship bracelets she had made for her new team. When she gave Sadie her bracelet, she asked how she was feeling, because in character, Sadie seemed to be feeling down. Out of character, we all knew that Sadie had planned on playing her differently, so we all assumed this was how. She proceeded to brush Addison off and put the bracelet in her pocket. Now I want you all to keep in mind that this entire exchange I just described went on in a text chat, which will be a detail that's important in a short while. The session continued, and Addison handed out the other trinkets to the party, and soon after, the base's security alarm went off. As a group, we ran to where the alarm was going off, and it was the storage room. And we found that a member of the previously mentioned evil team had infiltrated our base with a bomb. Now, dear reader, how do you think a character that has been previously stated to suffer from anxiety would react from being told she was now in a room with an active bomb? Addison launched into a full-blown panic attack and ran out of the room, hyperventilating. Once she was out of the room, she went to go sit down on the floor, and her Ryulu tried its best to calm her down, as she'd been trained to do. Meanwhile, back in the storage room, Isaac apprehended the evil guy, and Roy tried to defuse the bomb. And Sadie? She did nothing. That is, until she decided to leave the storage room and approach Addison, who was still mid-panic attack, and said,
Hey, if you're going to sit out here and be useless, can you at least watch my Pokemon? Thanks.
Sadie then proceeded to leave all of her Pokemon with Addison and head back into the storage room. I will say, I don't entirely remember what all happened next in-game because I was still processing the fact that Sadie responded to a character having a panic attack by calling them useless. The session ended soon after that, and I confronted Sadie in our game's Discord chat, basically saying, "Hey dude, what the heck, not cool." At which point he responded that,
I said that Sadie wasn't feeling herself.
and
She's more irritable.
he then started to complain that,
No one even asked Sadie how she was feeling.
and when both Roy and I told them that Addison did in fact ask Sadie if she was okay, and if she wanted to talk about it, Sadie claimed that he
Didn't hear me.
Now, as you remember, the entire exchange between Sadie and Addison at the beginning of the last session took place in text chat. When I told him this, he responded by saying that he
Didn't notice it.
and that he
Thought we were all ignoring him.
He then proceeded to give me the most fake apology I've ever heard, while simultaneously saying that he didn't like me as a player. And now, Session 4. Roy, Isaac, and I showed up on time for the session, and waited a full hour before giving up and leaving the call. Neither Sadie nor the GM ever showed up for the session. It's at this point, dear reader, that I should tell you that I normally have an extremely short temper. Under the circumstances, I was being much more patient than I normally was, since I really liked this group and the concept of the game. At that moment, I snapped. Sadie and I got into a full-blown argument in chat where he continually tried to manipulate and guilt-trip me into forgiving him for his bullcrap. Sadie also claimed that he was the only one who showed up for the game and waited for an hour, and all of us bailed on him. He then posts a screenshot that proves that he didn't show up until an hour after our scheduled game time. You also might have noticed that the GM had only been mentioned in the story a couple of times. Well, that's because as soon as the third session ended, he refused to post anything in the game's Discord. And as I mentioned before, he didn't even show up for Session 4. Now, over the course of pretty much this whole story, Roy and I had been repeatedly trying to get in contact with the GM over both Roll20 and Discord, and neither of us had heard a peep. We even went as far to schedule a chat with the GM, just the three of us, which he agreed to, and he never showed up. From there, things just evolved even further. Sadie claimed that he had been in a voice chat with the GM and some of the GM's friends, where all of them said he was in the right. When I told him to post proof, all he had was a screenshot of a call screen with a bunch of people, none of which matched the GM's Discord profile. When we pressured him on this, he claimed that the GM had 3 other Discord profiles, and when asked why there were no existing screenshots of the actual conversation, he said,
Most of it was in voice.
as if that was even a remotely valid excuse. From there, he continued to deny his actions throughout the course of our sessions. He even threw in last-minute jabs at Roy and I, saying that I
Was acting like this because I'm on my monthly.
and that,
Roy was just white knighting.
at that point, I was past being done. I told Roy that I was sorry that things had turned out this way, and I threw some insults at Sadie for good measure, blocked them, and left the server for good. It's sad that a group that was getting along so well, in a setting that seemed so incredibly cool, had to end in such a catastrophe. Roy and I are actually still good friends, but sadly, this wasn't the last I ever heard from Sadie. Additionally, throughout the whole experience, Sadie was complaining to Roy in private messages, but still complaining about him in the game chat. And another note, Roy is gay, and was out to the whole group, so the whole White Knight comment didn't even make sense in the moment. But in any case, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have a story that you'd like me to narrate, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.